The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, it's Judymay Murphy here. I just wanted to check in with you for a few minutes around this idea of things being too late. Often we have that feeling as we get a little bit older that maybe we've left it too late, that we didn't accomplish everything we wanted to accomplish. And I'd like you to think back to the excitement that you held at some stage in your life, the time that you were really convinced that you were going to have the best marriage ever, that you were going to live in the castle, whatever that castle looks like for you, that you were going to travel the world, that you were going to make millions and millions and millions of dollars, that you were going to really make it happen, that you were going to make a huge difference, that people were going to know your name, whatever that was for you. Just think back to that moment and then ask yourself why it is that you perhaps don't have that degree of excitement and tenacity and gung ho that you had back then. And for so many people, it isn't even about time. It's just about the fact that they feel worn down by the effort and they start to kind of pull the dream in a bit, kind of like, well, if I shrink it a little bit here, that will make it easier. I was perhaps naive to think that I could have an amazing marriage and stay in love. I was perhaps too naive to think that I could make millions. I'll be satisfied with hundreds of thousands. I'll be satisfied with a marriage that's more of a friendship. I'll be satisfied with being well known on my street rather than in my town, in my country, in the world. And that to me is desperately sad, because the point is this, that you have reached the stage where you have enough experience and enough knowledge to actually make the dream come true. You are so much closer than you were before, and yet you're telling yourself that you are further away simply because you've kind of brought on board these disappointments. And for so many people, it leads to a situation where they don't believe that the future is going to be radically different from the way that the past was. They either think it's going to be worse, that their glory days are behind them, or that it's going to be just a little bit better, that it's going to incrementally grow better. And that is not the case. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. So the thing that we're told about our glory days is kind of interesting, because I just Googled it. I just said, what does Google come up with when you type in my glory days? And this is what came up. The very first thing that it said was, my glory days are over. Now, Google is really just sort of as well as being a great marketing, advertising, money-making tool, it also is a great reflection of the thinking in the world. What is it that's going on? So I wasn't too surprised to find this idea of, the glory days being over, being a predominant idea out there in the culture. And also, I was remembering back to that really great Bruce Springsteen song, Glory Days. And some of the lyrics from that are just sitting back trying to recapture a little of the glory of, while time slips away and leaves you with nothing, mister, but boring stories of glory days. And for so many people, that is the reality. And what I'd like to suggest to you is that's not your predominant reality if you're on this call. If you're listening to me right now, you know that there's more. Otherwise, you just wouldn't have bothered to show up. You'd have just gone and diverted yourself with something else that wasn't educational. So I know that you're not completely living in the past, but I'd also like to suggest to you that you are still being influenced by this idea that somehow you've got to downsize on your dream. Whether that is that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, whether that's, well, I haven't really gotten to grips with this new social media. I haven't really gotten to grips with technology. I haven't really done this yet. And because I haven't done it yet, chances are I won't. But my kids, if you start talking about your kids within 2 or 3 sentences of talking about your dream, then you are definitely downsizing on the dream. You're definitely not realizing that your glory days are ahead of you when you choose them to be. And for this, I'd like to bring on board a few real life references. These are people who could easily have told themselves a story that it was kind of over, and instead they turned it around. The actor F. Murray Abraham, who he was 40, from loads and loads of movies, he was 45 when he landed the big role that he won an Oscar for. I believe it was he played Salieri in Amadeus, right? And he almost gave up at the age of 43. At the age of 43, he was like, this isn't working. And he kind of dialed it back a little bit. And thank goodness he didn't, because he went on to have the most incredible career. Same with the opera singer, Andrea Bocelli. He, had his first big break at the age of 34. That's when he really started to go for it. He'd been singing right up until that time, but he was told, you know what, that's too late for an opera singer to start to want to hit the big time at 34. And thank goodness he didn't listen. So I want you to be a no age person. I want you to just say, it doesn't matter how old I am, because none of us know how many years we have left or how many days we have left. We just don't know. And so why not operate from that? Why not just sort of say, well, you know what? I've got as much chance of anybody of living a glorious life for the next 50, 60, 70 years. So I'm going to go with that. The creative Spider-Man, Stan Lee, he didn't start to really seriously draw his cartoon characters until he was 43 years old. Same with the chef, the TV chef Julia Child, like a huge character in America and across the world. And they even made a movie about her a few years ago. A real personality. She didn't even start cooking until she was about 39. She didn't start to study it properly. Like, she couldn't cook anything. And she just ended up, I believe she was in France because her husband was there for his work or something. And that's why, she just went and took classes. And she was 50 when she had her first TV show. And yet I hear people in show business the whole time, and they're sort of saying things like, oh, well, I'm going to be 30 next month, so it's too late. I'm like, too late for what? Are you insane? You're just getting started. And then they start to think that their age is the thing that's holding them back. It's not. It's their mindset about their age. And if you make the decision today that your age is completely an advantage to you, and your age is the thing that guarantees the dream rather than the thing that closes it down or slows it down, then that mindset is what's going to carry you through. And although I'm really not a fan of Kentucky Fried Chicken, the product, I'm a big fan of Colonel Sanders, the man, for what he did. Because he, got his retirement check, and he realized, I can't live off this. And he started to sell his special recipe chicken and create the great franchise at the age of 66. He had the idea. He started at 66. Wow. Think about the thing that you've been doing that maybe you have shelved through the story that you're telling yourself. And you started it way before 66. You're way ahead of many of these great world achievers, right? The writer Laura Ingalls Wilder only started writing in her 40s. She started to write a column, and she was in her 60s when she started to write the Little House on the Prairie books. And these are books that entertained loads of young people for years and years, and then, of course, ended up being turned into a big television show. And if at the age of 59, you had to say, hey, you're going to do something that is going to last way beyond your lifetime and is going to influence so many people, bringing them back to the goodness of the land and good, honest family values, I don't know if she'd have believed you. But the thing is that she believed herself. She believed the calling that was in there, and she didn't tell herself a story about it being too late. So let's just run this one home. I want you to know that it's not a question of there being any evidence either. None of these people had evidence that what they were doing was going to work. You look at the little guy up there in the corner. That's Charles Darwin. He was 50 when The Origin of the Species came out. That was the book that kind of made him really, really well known in Victorian England. Up until then, he was absolutely nobody except to a few sort of geologists and botanists. Susan Boyle. We all love the story about what happened to Susan Boyle. That she was a woman with learning difficulties. She, wasn't finding life very, very easy. The way she navigated it was, it was hard. And yet she sang. She just lived out of her joy, and then her moment came. And I'd like to suggest to you that your moment is coming. Your stage is there. And all you've got to do is you've got to make sure that you're ready, and then you've got to show up. But if Susan Boyle said to herself, well, I'm too old. I don't have the right shoes. They'll laugh at me. And she was right in a way, because she was way older than most of the contestants. She was criticized for how she looked in so many different ways. And they did laugh at her. And then look at what happened. And look at how that resonated with us. Like, we were all, and are still like all so in love with her, right? So inspired by her. So I'd like to suggest to you that this isn't just about you. This is about how you're going to also inspire others. Mother Teresa was 38 before she even opened that little, what became absolutely a huge phenomenon, the Home for the Dying in Calcutta. And I remember visiting it, and it was, such a huge part of the city. like a very much a central part of the city. The home of the city is there. It's not the governmental homes. It really is the place that she created at the age of 38. Up until then, actually, she one of the places she lived was the convent where I went to school, and we were always being told, oh, that's where she slept. That was her room over there, and so she always felt like a very real person to me, even before I got to India, and I was lucky enough to be able to get to be around her before she passed away. And if you look at someone there like that wonderful old lady in the black and white photograph is Grandma Moses. And when she died in the 60s, I think it was either the late 50s or early 60s, I've forgotten. But John F. Kennedy, who was the president at the time, he talked to the nation about her, and he sort of said, what a great loss it was to the nation. She was a very, very famous painter, a famous artist. She didn't even pick up a paintbrush until she was 76. Up until then, she was just doing her little bits of tapestry, and no one was paying attention to her. And when she died in her 90s, or late 90s, she was one of the most famous women in America. We've got Ray Kroc there. We've also got Nelson Mandela, who had absolutely zero evidence that things were going to become so huge for them. So if you don't have evidence right now, great, you're in good company. Make it mean something. Now I want you to look at this guy, Winston Churchill, one of my favorites. I have always studied Winston Churchill, read his stuff. He kept copious diaries, an astonishing character. And what most interests me about him is the fact that he was really, really well celebrated. He was really, really famous in that he was the Prime Minister of England during the Second World War. He was the one that was making all the war decisions. He was the one that was, trying to get America involved, who was, making decisions about, what the spies would be doing and going over to wartime Germany. And, he was the guy, right? And then he was really hurt because right after the war, he was voted out of office. And it was just a kind of a feeling in the UK. It's believed that the feeling was that they needed to turn it over to a Labour government because it was like about rebuilding the country and that a Labour government would do better. But he just felt very rejected. So he felt like he had everything going on and then suddenly nothing. And perhaps that's the case. Perhaps that's what went on with you, that you had a time of being, center stage, rocking it out, making it happen, or being in this amazing relationship or doing really well in a certain economic climate. And then suddenly you can't really believe that, oh, hold on, where did that go? Is my party over? And no, not at all. Because what happened to Winston Churchill was he used that time to grow even stronger and to write really well and to tour the United States and lecture and just know that the next wave was coming. And indeed it did. And he got reelected and he became prime minister again. And but in that time, that's when his real legacy was built. He is known for being the guy that came up with the phrase "the Iron Curtain" and all these different scenarios, ideas, phrases that are now just part of our parlance were created by him. And he's just an extraordinary man. So if you are between waves right now, believe me, that's all that's going on. Don't take that as evidence of something being over. You don't just get one bite of the apple. You don't just get one turn. I completely do not believe um, when Andy Warhol says, everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame. It's like you don't. You get as many 15 minutes clumped together in however long a time you want. You get what you want. But if after if you arrive at fame and you believe it's only going to last 15 minutes, that mindset is going to cause that to come true. If you have your 15 minutes and then it looks like it's on a downward spiral, unless you pick it up, it is going to spiral downwards, but it's up to you. So don't, be your own best cheerleader here. Don't do yourself down. Don't be someone who's in the enemy camp, as it were. Just let yourself know this is temporary. Oh, this is part of it, and it is part of it. I'm very blessed that I know a lot of people who are very famous in the world, and they panic as soon as they come off a movie, as soon as they finish shooting that series of their TV show, even though they know the TV show is picked up for the next season, they kind of panic. And that's often when they come to me and they just sort of say, what should I do? What should I do? So that's natural. Everyone feels that when the evidence is not daily around you, when you're not surrounded by cameras in the case of performers, or you're not, that you can't see the money coming in the case of traders or whatever it is, you can choose to take that as evidence of it's not working, or you can choose it to take it as evidence of it is working. It's just in a different phase right now, and I need to work a little differently during this phase. I really love Vera Wang, not just because her clothes are awesome, but because she's a really good example of a serial success. Someone who just reinvented herself. She realized that she wasn't going to be able to do the same thing in exactly the same way throughout her lifetime, but she could keep increasing the level at which she was playing. So she was initially a figure skater. And of course, she couldn't be a professional figure skater in the same way once her body got older. Like she could keep just being awesome at it, but she also realized that she wasn't really feeling fulfilled by it anymore. So it was time for something else. And she became an editor at Vogue. And then when she was kind of passed over for being in charge of the whole shebang, she decided to reinvent herself again. And that's when she became the world famous designer that she is. And then once her dress is really famous, she didn't stop there. And we now have her perfume ranges and all kinds of great things going on. So realize that even though one aspect or one incarnation of the dream might be over for you, either because it was dependent on physical agility, or something that you just can't do anymore, then realize that you can take the lessons that you learned from that, because there's no doubt that the discipline she had to condition into herself to be a figure skater really served her when she came to do other things. So I'd like you to think about that it might be slightly different, and just ask yourself the question, what else could it be? And as part of that, we need a few references for, that you don't have to be the same thing, that you can actually have an idea and start to do something completely different. I mean, my father is like my hero right now, because at the age of 71, he had been widowed for a few years and he had a stroke. And then by the time he was 73, he had completely changed his body. I mean, I have never seen my dad in such good nick. He is just, his body is just incredible. His posture, his strength, his muscle tone, everything, just extraordinary. There's no way you would think he was a man of 73. And he also, during that time, he fell in love and married a beautiful woman, beautiful in every single way. And he rearranged his life. He moved to a new home in a different part of the country. He started to live very, very differently. So he radically reinvented himself at the age of 71. Okay, so if you're younger than that, you really have no excuse. But also, we have some references of, again, people doing it in their 80s and 90s. So think about that. Are you just using it as a handy excuse? Are you just looking to reach for an excuse? It used to be that you could sort of say it was the economy. You used to say it was because you were being a parent. You used to be able to say it was because this didn't work out for you. Is age just a handy excuse for you? I'd like to suggest that you just give that up, because it's not serving you. It really isn't. So back to this idea of reinvention. I really loved Joyce Mayer, I think her last name is, I can't remember, but we know her from programs like The View, and she has her own show. She's the lady there with the red hair sitting beside President Obama. And what I love about her was, up until her late 40s, I think she was like 49, she was still a teacher. She was a high school English teacher. Okay. And she decided that that was enough. She'd done that. She wanted to do more. She wanted to be more. And she just went for it. And look at her now, one of America's top broadcasters. Same if you look at Harrison Ford. He had been acting for a while, wasn't sure if it was really working for him. He went back and he was working full time as a carpenter when he got the call to do Star Wars. And we all know what happened after that. Okay? So don't think just because you've been something in the past that you're stuck being that. You can be whatever you choose to be. And I'm sorry if that sounds a little bit too Pollyanna-ish, but if that phrase kind of grates against you, I'd like to suggest that that little slight cynicism that you have is really based in fear, based in the idea of, it not being as easy as it sounds. You know what? It might not be as easy as it sounds, but it might be. It really depends on how you do it. It depends on how you set the system up. And the first place that you set it up is in your brain. And I can tell you this, it is certainly easier than regret. That is the toughest thing, to sort of say, wow, I could have gone for it and I didn't. I could have made tons of money and lived an amazing life. And instead I chose comfort. Instead, I chose to protect myself from criticism. Instead, I chose, what are you choosing right now? And what would you prefer to choose? And for many of you, I really sympathize with you, because so many people do hit a kind of a rock bottom moment, a place where you just like have the wind knocked out of you and you just kind of think, I can't get up again. I just need easy now. I just need easy. And I'd like to suggest to you that that's kind of not the point. Like, what is the point of going through something that is incredibly strengthening, that really, really grows you, And instead of using that strength and using that growth to kind of wrap around great new dreams, instead you choose to kind of just hobble around a bit. Like you're knocked down, so you're going to stay hunched. That is not the purpose of being knocked down. Okay. The purpose of being knocked down is so that you get it, so that you have living references within yourself of, I can survive anything. I can do this. I can make this happen. I can turn this around completely for myself. And so that's what I'd like to invite you to do. And just remember, anytime you're watching a movie, the bit where, it's raining and the warrior has lost like all his troops and lost their family and lost the country and everyone has turned against him, at that point is when it gets interesting. As long as the warrior doesn't just kind of sit there and make himself a sandwich and watch TV. All right. So you know what I'm saying here. And part of it is that after a while, when you've had a whole bunch of disappointments, you can start to feel a bit like, okay, I'm kind of done now. I need to step back just to protect myself. And really, I just love that phrase from Jim Rohn about that we must learn to discipline our disappointments. And that's exactly it. It's about how we react to our disappointment. We can kind of say, okay, you know what, this feels sad. I feel rejected. I feel hurt. But feelings are not facts. The fact might be that you were turned down for something, that something didn't work out, but you don't need to then say, because that has made me feel so awful, I am going to just withdraw and self-protect and make sure that doesn't happen to me again. Instead of saying, you know what, I might be disappointed like this again, but the next time I'm going to be better at it. The next time I might catch it earlier. It might not happen to me. The next time, I'll learn even more. So that the next time, the time after that, it's really going to work. And for this, I just love the story about Alan Rickman. He's a man that I admire on so many levels. And what happened to him was he hadn't really broken through into the movie world yet. He was a very successful stage actor. And he really wanted to have this movie career too. And he was in the stage production, the Broadway production of Les Liaisons Dangereuses, and was a huge success. And pretty much all of the cast from that production was hired to be in the movie Dangerous Liaisons, the movie version of the book, of the play. And so everyone was hired except for Alan Rickman, who was replaced by John Malkovich, because John Malkovich was kind of, his tide was really high at the time. And what Alan Rickman could have done is he could have just said, right, that's it. It's over for me. It's finished. But he didn't. He kept going for those auditions. He kept talking to his agent. He kept doing the great stage work. And within 2 years, he got his kind of breakthrough movie role. I believe was it the one in Die Hard, the first Die Hard where he played the villain. Then he went on to do sort of Robin Hood, again playing a villain. And then he went on to, he's best known for Harry Potter, playing a villain. But I actually know him from when I was in grad school. I used to work chaperoning kids on film sets. And one of the films I worked on was Michael Collins, and he played Eamon de Valera, who I'm not going to claim was a villain. He was the founding father of the Irish Republic. Let's leave the politics aside. So basically, I actually can see how this man operate. I could see how he operated and how he would think about things and how he would work things through. And I saw one day that he wasn't very happy with a performance, and he just he thought for a moment, and then he just turned around and he said, "I'd like to do that again." And he did it again. And I can just tell that was how he lives life. It's just, I'd like to do that again. I'd like to get that another go. And it was very simple. It was very undramatic. But how many of us take the energy that we could be using to say, you know what, I'd like to get that another go. And instead we spend it beating ourselves up or trying to look for something else. And again, this idea that we might have wasted time, I think is just beautifully illustrated by Eckhart Tolle, who is one of the probably the biggest speaker in the mind, body, spirit movement, along with Wayne Dyer. And he's a gorgeous man. If you ever have a chance to spend time around him, he is just, gentle and sweet and so smart. Okay. Absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous man. And many of you know, he spent years just sitting on a park bench. Okay. But that time, kind of like the time that Nelson Mandela spent in prison on Robben Island, that time that is spent is not wasted. So if you're beating yourself up about time that you have so-called wasted, start to list everything that you learned from that time. Is it that you learned that you wanted more? Is it that you learned gratitude for what you did have? Is it that you learned how to deal with people who weren't being fair to you? Is it that you learned that you can survive getting your heart broken again? Is it that what did you learn? You learned something. It's not wasted. And it might not become clear until later on what it was that you learned during that time. So please don't tell yourself a story that somehow, okay, fine, I'm going to get started again. But I hate the fact that there's this middle bit where nothing happened. It did. Just perhaps you weren't as productive as you could have been, and now's the time. And then comes the question, when do you give up? Someone asked me that once. They said, oh, I've been trying this, I've been trying that, and I've been trying the other. And so with that question, the answer is never, because you're here to make it happen. Really, does it matter if you try it throughout your 40s and 50s and it doesn't work? Does that mean you just give up at that point? Well, Diana Nyad didn't. She became the first woman at the age of 64 to swim outside of a shark tank from Cuba to the mainland of Miami. And now she gets to live out, the second half of her life knowing that she's a champion for having done that. And she's a huge inspiration to so many swimmers, athletes, women, loads of people all around the world. But that feeling of triumph, I wanted to experience this. This is what I was here. I promised myself that. I promised myself that experience here on this planet in this lifetime. And I did it. And that is what I want for you to have. I want for you to have that. So if you promised yourself a long time ago that you were going to be a multimillionaire, I still want that for you, and so do you. And I'd like to invite you to step back into that. If you promised yourself that you would have, an easeful, fun, playful, passionate, adventurous relationship, and you ended up with some kind of like nightmare screaming match scenario that ended in a bitter, twisted divorce, and you're telling yourself, oh, okay, wasn't I naive? No, you weren't. There was just stuff that you had to learn. And this time, it's going to be better. It has to be. But it's only going to be better when you decide that you're going to make it happen. So think of that time when you did make things happen. And it might be something like you're going to pass an exam, or you're going to go and visit a particular country, or you were going to study with someone, or you were going to, learn about something in particular. And then you made that happen. And do you remember that when you made that decision that you were going to make that thing happen, it had a different quality to that would be nice. Because a lot of people, they've let go of the dream and they don't realize they've let go of the dream because they've substituted with just goals. The dream is the juice. The dream is the big prize. It's the point. It's why you're here. And the amount of people that could easily be making it happen, and they've gotten to a point where they can make it happen, and that's the point at which they, usually not in a day. It's much more insidious than that. It just kind of creeps up. And you just lower your standard and you just decide, oh, do you know what? I didn't exactly want that anyway, right? So I'm going to say to you, life's not some old armchair that you just, sink into and decide, okay, I've done my bit now. We're not that. I don't believe in retirement. I really don't. I don't think we can, because those of us who are kind of in any way conscious about the way that we're living, there's way too much to be done for others, even if we've made things happen to a really good level for ourselves. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to push away the pain of the past. Just so say, okay, I'm done. I'm not focused on that. I'm not taking that as evidence of anything. Keep learning. Just do whatever you can to get to the next level. Whoever you need to get coached by, whatever you need to learn, whatever books you need to read, whatever events you need to go to, just do it. Just sort of say, well, I'm going to be really happy for the younger people that are there, but you know what? My dream is just as important as theirs. And in fact, I'm closer than they are to making my stuff come true. So let me make that happen. And then I would say as well, carry zero shame about what has or hasn't happened, because sometimes we can feel a little bit foolish when we've made big announcements to people. I'm going to do this, and then it hasn't happened. There was someone I was coaching recently who she said that the reason she had come to me for coaching was because she had been telling her family for years that she was going to write a book, and then she didn't. And now it was pretty much the family joke that whenever they came together, someone would say something like, "Oh, and how's your life going?" And they say, "Yeah, pretty good, about as well as so and so's book." And she just felt so much shame. It's like, well, first of all, let's get rid of that shame. Just because the spotlight is on what you didn't achieve, it doesn't mean that there's anything bad about it. And the really fun thing is we can use that as impetus to make it happen. But when you're carrying shame, you tend to just avoid focusing at all in that area because it's just too shameful. It just feels too heavy. It feels too, shame is the thing that says to us that we're somehow broken, that we're somehow damaged, that we somehow are not enough to make the dream come true. And when we are feeling that shame, as I say, we're not going to focus on that area and the thing isn't going to happen. And so the shame is just sort of left sitting there stagnant. But instead, let's say, no, it's okay because I wasn't doing it to prove myself. I was doing it as a way of learning. So let me learn more. I obviously either it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right place, or I hadn't learned enough. So let's take care of all those aspects. And for some of you, you might be sort of thinking, well, I don't want the things I wanted when I was younger. I wanted fame. I don't want that anymore. I wanted a huge, 100-room mansion. I don't want that anymore. That's fine. It might just be that the dream has been upgraded into something a little more esoteric, something like, I really want to feel really proud of myself, or I really want to be an example to others. But in order to do that, you can't just avoid the material either. A lot of people think that they are transgressing, they're kind of like rising above, that they're somehow more spiritual. And I often see this in self-help. People start off wanting to make the money and make material things happen. And then when they start to get disappointed and start to get knocked back by the world, they quickly shift over into this place of, well, no, in fact, I just want to serve others and I just want to be spiritual. Well, they sort of say, well, I've transcended all of that. No, you haven't transcended, you've avoided, okay? You only get to transcend once you've actually made it happen. So let's make that money and then you can give it away, okay? If you need to have proof to yourself that you've transcended that, let's actually make it that. And the next thing I'd like to say is make sure that your improved dream is not a compromise. So, yes, it might be that you don't want the huge house anymore, but what's even better about the new place that you want to live in? Is it that, because for me, I thought it was going to be a huge place. And I realized, no, you know what? I'm so nomadic that actually what I've made happen now is having homes in several places. And that is what really works for me. So that's when the dream changed. It wasn't a compromise. It was actually something that suited me. And it doesn't suit me to have great big places because, you know, when you're away from a place for a long time, a lot of your stuff is in the bigger place. So you have to be able to have, 3 or 4 toothbrushes, winter coats, whatever. So you're not having to lug stuff from one location to the next. So this is what you have to do is you have to say to yourself, it's changed, but it's not smaller. And how do you know? It's because it excites you even more than when you initially set those goals. And I'd like to just leave you with this one thought, that your glory days are ahead of you. And they're not way in the future either. They're much, much closer than you can imagine. And I'd like to invite you to do whatever it takes to make this happen, because you've earned it already. You've been through enough. You've earned this. So just step up and claim it. It's just a little bit further along the road. It's just a little bit more smart as a way of playing. It's a little bit more full out, a little bit more motivation, a little bit more momentum, a little bit more intensity, a lot more heart, a lot more soul, a lot more of whatever it is that you bring to that mix. A lot more of being you, a lot more of growing into the new you that you need to be so that you can hug and grow and organically become the person that you need to be in order to engulf that goal. And it is going to happen. It is going to work. And I'm really, really looking forward to celebrating that with you. So until I see you again, take care.